Coming up on this Tuesday edition of Newsline at noon, hopes are up. An experimental drug might have saved the lives of 2 US missionary workers infected with Ebola as the death toll from the deadly virus approaches 900. A public outcry over the death of a bullied young army conscript forces a thorough investigation into violence and human rights abuses in the South Korean military. Plus, Israel and Hamas agree to a 72-hour ceasefire. The question is, will it lead to the end of the month-long conflict? These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
It's noon Tuesday, August 5th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Ju.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. We start with the worst ever Ebola outbreak in West Africa that has many concerned. But there are 2 patients grabbing far more headlines than the rest, they being 2 American aid workers who contracted the virus while helping victims in the worst hit areas.
Both are said to be recovering well thanks in part to an experimental drug that was rushed to them. Shin Se-min has the latest.
The 2 American missionary workers infected with the Ebola virus might have been saved by an experimental drug. After receiving the so-called ZMapp serum, Dr. Kent Brantly and Nancy Writebol reportedly began improving within just a couple of hours. Developed by San Diego-based Mapp Biopharmaceutical, this serum had never been tested in humans before, only in monkeys who survived the virus when given the serum within 48 hours of infection. As there's no proven treatment and no vaccine for the disease, any sign of possible cure is garnering attention. The current outbreak is the largest recorded in history and it's spreading fast. The director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the outbreak is currently out of control. And at the outset, it's extremely difficult to detect whether someone has been infected as Ebola begins with symptoms similar to the common cold. But within days, the patient will begin to experience chronic abdominal pain, bleeding eyes, vomiting, and diarrhea, along with deadly organ failure, eventually resulting in death within just a couple of weeks. However, as it's difficult to detect the virus at the early stage, there's an increased risk of transmission. Ebola can kill up to 90% of those infected, although in the current outbreak, the death rate stands at 55%. This latest outbreak was first detected in Guinea in February and has since expanded to Sierra Leone, Liberia, and even to Nigeria. West African states especially lack the resources to fight Ebola, and deep cultural suspicions about the virus make it more difficult to put the brakes on its spread. The World Health Organization announced Monday that the current death toll has topped 880, triple the number of fatalities recorded during any other outbreaks. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And here in Korea, where an army bullying scandal has shaken the nation to its core, the government will expand an investigation into the killing of a 23-year-old army conscript who died after being struck in the chest by senior soldiers who had already put him through months of hell. UDN reports.
Forced to hold a horse-riding stance until the early hours of the morning, told to lick spit off the ground, and fed spoonfuls of toothpaste. This was just some of the awful bullying a 23-year-old private first class had to go through until he choked to death after being hit in the chest by 5 of his comrades back in April. The government's slow response to the incident, with April's deadly Seoul affair disaster taking precedence, enraged the nation. The public is demanding a thorough investigation and also a complete overhaul of Korea's military culture. It prompted Defense Minister Han Min-gu to apologize to the nation over the failure to prevent such an incident from occurring, and he vowed to launch a deeper probe to get to the bottom of the case.
It's a military commander's basic responsibility to send enlisted men back to their parents safe and sound. We feel a great burden over this incident.
The army announced it will consider pressing murder charges against the 5 soldiers if found guilty for the young soldier's death. This is just another in a series of bullying incidents in recent months, and the public distrust about the military's poor management is growing. An army sergeant who'd been bullied by his comrades went on a shooting rampage back in June, killing 5.
When my son goes to the army, I'm going to check his body whenever I visit to see if he has been physically abused. I'm worried he may have to go through the same thing and be forced to hide it.
Harsh military practices and a distorted rank-based culture which seniors can use to abuse junior enlisted soldiers has long been prevalent in the military. To maintain a strong defense against North Korea, all South Korean men are mandated to serve in the military. But the recurrence of abuse-led deaths has the nation deeply worried about the safety of their sons in the military conscription system. Yurian, Arirang News.
Last month's by-election defeat sent Korea's main opposition party to the mat. They've been left without a leader or even a general sense of direction and aren't likely to find either until a party convention early next year. And for the time being, an interim leader will take over to push for reforms within the party. Ji Myung-gil has more.
Park Young-sun, who is serving as both the floor leader of the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy and the interim chief of its emergency committee, has been tasked with rebuilding and reforming the party. The committee will carry out a set of reforms until a new leadership is selected early next year.
Our party will select members for the emergency committee from both inside and out of the party. The public can also make recommendations through my Twitter, Facebook, or our party's website.
The committee will function as the main opposition's executive branch until a party convention next year, sometime before March. Their officials will pick the party's new chairman, secretary general, and other senior executives. In her new role, Park, a 3-term lawmaker, is faced with the arduous task of finding a way to unify different factions within the party. The pro-Nomuyon arm once held the lion's share of power, but was weakened following the defeat of former presidential hopeful Moon Jae-in, a key pro-No figure in the 2012 presidential election. Pundits say that the pro-No faction is now likely to make a comeback. The main opposition party has been in a state of turmoil since its defeat in last week's parliamentary by-elections. The party won just 4 of the 15 parliamentary seats are for grabs, prompting party co-leaders Kim Han-gil and An Chol-soo to step down to take responsibility. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
A monument dedicated to the many women forced into sexual slavery in the early 20th century has been unveiled in Union City, New Jersey. It's the 7th such memorial set up in the United States, but as our Kwon So-ah explains, this one is somewhat different from the others.
This iron butterfly has been established to remember the hundreds of thousands of women who were forced into sexual slavery before and during the Second World War by the Japanese military. Honoring the so-called comfort women from Korea, China, Taiwan, the Philippines, the Netherlands, and Indonesia, the monument was unveiled at Liberty Plaza in Union City, New Jersey on Monday. It is the 7th such monument in the United States honoring the sexual slavery victims, but this one is a bit different in that it's the first time a local government took the initiative in creating it. Korean communities had taken the lead in other projects throughout the U.S.
This is about human rights and it's about education. Educating our youth about what took place in the past so we don't make the same mistakes again.
2 surviving Korean comfort women took part in the emotional ceremony that welcomed some 400 people.
We thank the American and Korean people who have come here, and although we don't have much time left, we will live the rest of our lives with strength.
The monument is meant to remember the victims and raise awareness of Japan's atrocities, but as Union City Commissioner Lucio Fernandez says, it's about more than that. It's also about a general message of peace and the protection of women today throughout the world from kidnapping and sex crimes. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Now, Japan and China are said to be trying to arrange a meeting of their leaders during an upcoming APEC forum in Beijing to mend relations strained by a great many historical and also territorial disputes. Japan's Nikkei Business Daily reported on Monday that former Japanese Prime Minister Yasuo Fukuda held a secret meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping late last month and expressed the current Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's call for talks on the sidelines of this forum, which will be in November, voicing concerns over the lack of dialogue between the two nations. The paper said President Xi expressed a will to start taking positive steps to resolve the diplomatic deadlock. China-Japan relations have been at their lowest point in recent years due to disputes over some remote islands in the East China Sea and Shinzo Abe's visit to a controversial war shrine which China sees as a symbol of Japan's past militarism. Over now to the ongoing conflict in Gaza, where another ceasefire has been called by Israel and Hamas. This 72-hour truce proposed by Egypt is set to start at 8 a.m. local time on Tuesday. That's in just under 2 hours from now. The big question is, will it hold or will it just fall apart like the handful of ones before it? Our Connie Lee reports.
There will be a 3-day ceasefire on the Gaza Strip starting Tuesday. After nearly a month of fighting and multiple broken truces, Israel and Palestinian groups, including Hamas and Islamic Jihad, have agreed to a 72-hour ceasefire proposed by Egypt.
Hamas informed the Egyptians that it agrees to the 72-hour truce. The Israeli occupation forces should withdraw outside the border.
With previous truces falling through, often within a matter of hours, there's understandable concern about whether this one will last.
Israel will honor the ceasefire, as agreed to, and negotiated through the Egyptians. We'll be watching Hamas very closely. If Hamas violates this ceasefire, so Israel is prepared to respond.
To negotiate a longer-term deal, Israel and Palestinian groups also agreed to attend talks in Cairo with Egyptian mediators. The ceasefire deal comes after Israel's declaration of a 7-hour pause in the fighting on Monday. However, Palestinians accused Israel of breaking its own truce. Gaza's health ministry says Israel fired missiles at a house in a refugee camp in northern Gaza, killing at least 3 people, including an 80-year-old child. Israel says several rockets were fired from Gaza during that truce.
This operation is really taxing my soul. It's making me lose my humanity. I consider myself a liberal, but it's hard to stay very liberal when people are raining rockets on you every day.
More than 1,800 people, overwhelmingly Palestinian civilians, have been killed and nearly 2 million people displaced since the fighting started 4 weeks ago. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Now we're going to take a look at some of the other international headlines we're following on this Tuesday afternoon. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim, as always, who is standing by at the news center.
Eunice, let's begin in China. Rescue efforts are still very much underway there after Sunday's powerful earthquake rocked Yunnan province. But we hear some good news. We hear that people have been found alive.
That's right. China's Xinhua news agency reporting 32 people have been freed from the piles of rubble, including a 5-year-old boy who, despite suffering injuries to his legs, came out alive. That's a glimmer of hope for tens of thousands of emergency personnel working against the elements to search for more survivors of the 6.1 magnitude earthquake that hit Sunday afternoon. The brunt of the damage was felt in Ludian County, where more than 400 people are feared dead. 12,000 homes also collapsed in the quake. Rescue remains the primary mission, as instructed by Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, who you saw earlier there when he toured the disaster site on Monday. Beijing has allocated some $97 million for the relief mission, as the China Earthquake Administration placed its response level at its highest on Monday. Hundreds of aftershocks were recorded in the region as heavy rain and thunderstorms are forecast for days. A ferry carrying some 250 people has capsized in waters 30 kilometers southwest of Bangladesh's capital of Dhaka. Emergency teams have rescued 100 people and recovered 2 bodies. It is not clear what caused the accident, but a local police chief told the AFP that he had heard the ferry was overloaded with passengers and the river was rough. Both accidents are unfortunately not uncommon in Bangladesh's river network. 50 people died back in May when a ferry sank in the same district. Kurdish forces in Iraq will regroup and plan a counteroffensive against the Islamic State, which took 2 northern towns and the country's biggest dam in Mosul over the weekend. This time, Kurdish Peshmerga fighters will be supported by Iraqi air support after Baghdad agreed to dispatch its air force in their fight against the militants formerly known as ISIL, who also claimed large portions of Iraq's north and west in recent weeks. This comes despite months of difficult political relations between Baghdad and the partially autonomous Kurdish Authority. The Kurdish bloc had pulled out of the national government in July, protesting Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's accusations that Kurds were hiding IS militants. And some early signs of the impact of the EU and U.S. sanctions on Russia. Perhaps as many as 27,000 Russian tourists are said to be stranded abroad after a Russian tour company suspended its operations. Labyrinth blamed the negative political and economic situation, as well as a deterioration of the ruble exchange rate. And in a separate incident, a Russian billionaire businessman said his personal jet is out of service after Gulfstream refused to service his plane and banned his pilots from using its navigation equipment. Gennady Timchenko was among dozens of Russians sanctioned over the crisis unfolding in Ukraine.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea. Connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about...
Korea's foreign exchange reserves hit another record high in July, making it the 13th record-breaking month on the bounce. The nation's central bank said Tuesday that reserves swelled to $368 billion as of the end of last month, up almost $1.5 billion from June. The Bank of Korea attributes the increase to a rise in investment profits. Korea has the 7th largest foreign reserves in the world, following China, Japan, and Switzerland, among others. Now, for the Korean economy to reach its growth potential, more women are needed in the workplace. That's the joint conclusion reached in a new study conducted by the International Monetary Fund and the Bank of Korea. The nation's economic participation rate for women stood at 55.6% last year, a full 22 percentage points lower than their male counterparts. The study says policy reforms such as tax benefits and childcare subsidies could narrow the gap to at least 15 percentage points. It adds that the expansion of the labor force due to having more women in the workplace would cancel out the negative effects of Korea's rapidly aging population.
Now, Kakao, which dominates Korea's messenger application market, is aiming to expand into various businesses, from e-commerce to a mobile call taxi service. This move comes as the company searches for its next growth engine. Our Hwang Jie tells us more.
With its nationwide user base, Korea's largest mobile messenger app, Kakao, is striving to break into new businesses. In order to provide an online credit card payment service starting next month, Kakao has already reached partnerships with 9 credit card companies, including Shinhan Card and KB Kookmin Card. The service will allow users to make easier payments when they purchase goods on online shopping malls, just like PayPal. It's not the only e-commerce business that Kakao is trying to dive into. Another service dubbed Bank Wallet Kakao will allow users to transfer up to almost $100 a day to other Kakao users. The service is set to be introduced in September in conjunction with 15 local commercial banks. Kakao is also pondering whether to enter the call taxi service market. The service will assign the nearest taxis to users and also let them pay their fare with its e-wallet service. Experts say the plans show Kakao's aspiration to grow as an information and lifestyle service platform. It also points to Kakao's efforts to diversify its profits. Currently, Kakao's sales are heavily dependent on its Kakao game service that combines online mobile gaming with its free instant messaging app. Almost 80% of the company's sales came from the service last year. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Now, for the second year running, Seoul is the world's top city in clinical trials for developing new medicine. The Korea National Enterprise for Clinical Trials, analysing data from the US National Institutes of Health, found that just over 1% of all clinical trials worldwide last year were conducted right here in the Korean capital. That's number one among the 30 cities that were looked at. New York City and Houston in the US were second and third on the list, respectively. By country, the US was by far and away in the pole position. Nearly 40% of all clinical trials last year were conducted in the US, followed by Germany, Japan and France. Korea ranked 10th at nearly 2%. Now, a movie about a sea battle that occurred more than 400 years ago is taking the Korean box office by storm. Its name is Roaring Currents, and it's been breaking records since its release late last month. And the success has spawned fresh, greater interest in the movie's main character, one of Korea's most revered heroes, Admiral Lee Shin. Our Sun Jung-in reports.
Since its opening on July 30th, the period blockbuster Roaring Currents, known in Korea as Myeongyang, has been setting new box office records by the day. Following the nation's largest ever opening of 680,000 viewers, the movie became the fastest film to sell 3 million tickets just 4 days after its release. It also attracted more than 1.2 million moviegoers this past Saturday, which happens to be the largest single-day total in Korean film history.
I heard the movie has been attracting a record of viewers, so I came to watch it with my mom.
Movie critics believe the film's popularity stems not only from its high cinematic quality, but also from a desire to witness leadership at its highest level. The film depicts the historic Battle of Myeongyang during the Japanese invasion of Korea in 1592. Admiral Lee Shin, with just 12 vessels under his command, managed to fend off and destroy a Japanese fleet of more than 330 ships. The movie's success has spilled into Korean bookstores as well. A novel that shares the same name as the movie is a top seller, and other books on the Japanese invasion of Korea are being picked up again. Author Kim Hoon's Song of a Sword, or Karenore, has enjoyed a fresh wave of interest.
I think the recent trend represents the people's desire for a role model, someone we can learn strong leadership and strategy from.
The record-breaking film is set to sail into U.S. theaters on August 15th, which is Korea's Liberation Day, under the title The Admiral. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
Good afternoon, I'm Lee Ji-hyun with your weather update. Well, it should be hotter and sunnier than yesterday, and the clouds in the sky will clear out by this afternoon, although there could be spotty showers in the southern provinces, and even here in Seoul, it's drizzling right now. And the discomfort index will rise as we head into the midday, and by 3 this afternoon, people throughout the entire nation will feel quite uncomfortable, so let's take it easy today. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The highs in Seoul and Daegu will rise to 32, while Gwangju and Busan should reach 30 respectively. Now for other regions, it looks like Jeju Island and Daejeon will top out at 31, and Dokdo should see a high of 29, while Mount Kumgang reaches at 23. Now Super Typhoon Halong is approaching, and it's likely to threaten the western portions of the Japanese mainland and or South Korea. It will trigger massive rainfall and strong gusts, so we'll keep you updated on Halong's path. Well, that's all for me at this hour, and that's all for Korea. And here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Mark and I'll be back at the same time on Wednesday. Thank you for watching.